episode 6 of Finding North. It's actually another beautiful Sunday today. This seems to be now happening every time we do a podcast. The weather in London seems to be brightening up, so that's one of the reasons we actually should continue doing that. So as you can see, we have again a guest on the show today after having Lee and Simon last week. Today we have Oscar on the show. Oscar's going to introduce himself in just a second. So today it's going to be the three of us. We've just had a very little introductory chat. Again, it's fully unscripted. We know probably a couple of things that we want to ask Oscar, specifically around something that you can see just behind him, that logo on the wall about TheDesk, the venture that he co-founded 1.5 years ago. So instead of me doing the introduction and going through your CV, Oscar, why don't you just quickly introduce yourself, where you come from, what you're doing at the moment, what excites you, and maybe also, how you find yourself at the moment in this whole fun and games COVID-19 situation.
That's a lot of questions in one. Let me first explain that I'm actually calling from Hong Kong. So in Hong Kong, it's 6:15. So it's getting darker here. The Sunday is almost over here. So I was originally born in Seoul, adopted. So raised in Holland in a small, well, not small, the third largest student city in Holland called Groningen, which is close to the German border.
Mm. I can pick out the accent slowly now.
So I studied there and then went to art school there. I studied arts and product design. Went to London to the Royal College of Art. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I sort of stayed there for a few years, and I went back to Holland for my first job for O'Neill. Went back to UK for Nike.
O'Neill, as in the surfing and skateboarding.
The surf brand, the surf brand. That was my first job. And then went back to the UK for some different roles, including Nike, I think.
Were these design roles? What were these?
Yeah, design roles. Okay. I was focusing on, when I studied art and design in Holland, there was this department called accessory design, which was relatively new. When I went to London to the Royal College of Art, I don't know, that's quite a few years ago, they actually just opened its first master degree in accessories design because it was completely new. In the old days, fashion designers, those people that were designing the sweaters and the trousers, they would actually also design the accessories. But they noticed that was actually a slightly different skill set in terms of material use. When you talk about shoes, belts, eyewear, it almost was closer to product design. So that was the first course in London. So my first job was accessories for O'Neill, like all the nylon bags, the backpacks, the watches, the eyewear, all that stuff. And then I stayed in there, and then sort of going fast forward to probably, otherwise there's quite a few years to cover that. I ended up doing more product development. That was the reason why I actually ended up here in Asia, because all the supply chain and product development is done here still mostly in China. That's how I ended up kind of in Hong Kong, and that's why I'm still here. But I kind of lived. This is my third or fourth time I've lived here in Hong Kong, but I've been here now for about 7 years.
And you went back and forth to Europe or to other places in Asia during that time?
Mostly back and forth between Hong Kong and London. Okay. But I also lived in Beijing, and I've lived in Shanghai as well. That's where I actually met our mutual friend.
Yeah, exactly. Nico. Shout out to you. Thanks for introducing Oscar to me.
He was just sending me some kind of message, but I switched it off because it pings all the time.
Okay, so I actually realized I got that wrong earlier. So like you've not been doing the desk for a year or so. You've actually been doing that for 4 years. So apologies that I got this wrong. So maybe as sort of like a first question, right? We I think both Fahim and I are very interesting in just understanding, what sort of triggered the decision at the point from going from your different jobs in product design and working in industry, and I think your latest roles as MD for MWI, to going into becoming the co-founder of TheDesk. What happened at that point in time? Was it a lucky coincidence?
Well, I guess you probably understand this. Most people in the creative industry, I don't think plan things very well in life. And at least from the people that I know around me, yes, during work I plan a lot, but privately I just see what happens. And I think, I mean, I never really planned to go to Hong Kong. There was an opportunity to go, and I thought, well, I love Hong Kong. Why not? Let's do it. The same kind. Well, there was the reason why I went back to the UK was because I lost my job. So I thought, well, I had a new job in London, so I went back again. For me, there was really not a problem to relocate. For me, it was kind of okay, that's fine. And then that's also the reason how I ended up in Beijing. Actually, in fact, in 2009 or 2008, 2009, during the financial crisis, I was working for Liz Claiborne as the supply chain director here in Hong Kong. And they were merging with Ling Feng. At the time, I already knew that I was responsible for the transition, but of course, no one realized there was a financial crisis coming up. So that happened at the same time. As we were trying to reduce costs, we also merged with Ling Feng plus the financial crisis. So I lost my whole team. And I thought, well, no, Hong Kong is a pretty expensive place if you don't really work here. So I actually went back to London, and in 2009, it was very depressing there to be there. I mean, a lot of people lost their jobs. So I thought, well, that's probably not the best place to be. And I thought, well, I always wanted to go to Beijing, and I had been once just for a really short holiday trip, just for a few days. And I thought, you know what, I'd just go there and just, we'll see what happens. I maybe brush up my Chinese. I don't speak Chinese, but hey, this is a good excuse to go there. So I ended up going there, and I thought, holy moly, this is really cheap. I'm gonna stay a bit longer compared with Hong Kong. I can stretch my money out way longer than a few weeks here. So I just stayed there for a year, actually doing nothing. And then so by chance I got a new job in Hong Kong again. And during the time of, and going back to your question, how I actually started the co-working, during the time of 2009, I had been working already for 10, 15 years in this industry. And I went from a really creative job to basically looking at Excel sheets in supply chain and just negotiating cents, because you talk about an order that's 100,000 or 1,000,000 pieces. So every cent counts. And that creativity was, I used it in a very different way. It wasn't creative thinking, but it was just problem solving. If you work in supply chain, it's basically 24 hours, especially when you work with US and Europe. Shipping goes wrong, materials don't arrive, everything goes wrong basically. And that's very normal, but it's quite stressful. So I really wanted to escape that environment. I thought I really wanted to do something creative. So in 2010, when I went back to Hong Kong after the crisis, well, to 2011, I had a lot of friends in the creative industry. The problem was I had no portfolio. I mean, I was supply chain. So I had a really old portfolio from let's say 10 years ago. I did some freelance work, but it wasn't like award-winning stuff because it wasn't my full-time job at the time. So I knocked on a few doors because I knew the creative directors and the agency owners, and they basically said, Oscar, you're a really nice guy. I know you're super creative, but you really need a better portfolio because otherwise there's no way.
And where was this, Oscar? You were knocking on doors in Beijing, Hong Kong, or
mostly in Asia.
Asia? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I mean, of course, I helped them with the brainstorming. I laid out the whole process. So because I have a design background, so it wasn't too difficult to go back into it. But except I had no like big clients, so I was thinking, okay, there are two options. Either I just continue making good money in supply chain because I just that was the easy choice, or the most illogical choice was to do and start my own business to build my portfolio, which I did. So I thought, well, the quickest way of building a portfolio is actually starting my own business and just trying to get
becoming
clients.
your own client, right? In a sense.
Yeah, basically.
Do free work.
Well, the great thing about and maybe that sounds really bad, but it's not. The great thing about the creative industry is that anyone can be creative. So there's not like an accountant or like you need a special diploma certificate to show that you can do this. So that's a good and bad thing. But of course, people can see the work. So I started this business around 2011 with the purpose of, I think at 2010, I can't really remember. But so I started my own brand agency. And of course, I made all the mistakes, wasting way too much money on stupid shit that was really not needed.
Did you buy an expensive office chair, yeah?
Yeah, of course.
20 iterations on the logo.
I had amazing stationery. Chairs were good. Computers looked really nice. But of course, it was harder to get the clients, and I did get clients. But I think it was a combination of, I just didn't know. I realized quickly that I needed a portfolio of clients, and also I realized in Asia. I don't know. Have you worked in Asia with Asian clients?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. So
you have Florian, yeah.
Well, I've not worked out there, but I've been over there for work for periods of time, but like only short periods of time. So not like extended periods of time. You like actually living out there.
Yeah. So the difference I noticed was that people do like design, but isn't seen as a strategic benefit in their business. They see it more as a makeup. No, it's a nice to have, no, and it's more like because they can see it, they understand what it is. If you talk about coding, for example, that's completely different because people have no clue what you're talking about, and they think that you're trying to rip them off because they can't see it. So with brand strategy, and when you talk at least in Asia about brand strategy, people think about logos. No? I think that you see my background. Of course, that's just part of the brand language. That's part of that. But it's people. The budgets are completely different here. So I figured out really quickly this is not going to get me anywhere because one, if people do want to spend money, they go to the bigger agencies.
Yeah.
Because if you say, hey, you're a boutique agency, you have 4 or 5 people employed, although I had a very cool office, they go to the bigger brands. It's just they want to have a brand name.
Must have been the coffee, Oscar. Must have been the coffee. You just needed
maybe.
So you sort of then realize that you might have a good product, but you don't really have the market, right? So you might be good as a designer, you might have good people, you might have good ideas, but the market is maybe not yet ready for seeing the value in the design work and the brand strategy work that you were potentially offering at that point in time.
Yeah, I don't know. It actually is a really good question, Florian, because I don't know if the market wasn't ready or whether I was ready. But basically there was a misalignment in terms of my expectations and maybe from the client's perspective as well, where I thought they would understand this, but they clearly were looking after something else. When I talk about strategies and sort of, brand language, to me that's a very big project, and it adds a lot of value to creating a strategic advantage. No, it's not just that, well, let's pick out pink or blue or a nice font. That's so, yeah, either I had to really, let's say, almost swallow my own tongue during meetings, because I literally had to explain, like, in baby language things. And there's nothing wrong with that, by the way. But I really didn't get to the bits that I really, really wanted to do. So that's why I thought, well, this doesn't really make me very happy. I don't think the clients really appreciate this either, because it's not really going anywhere. So I just got stuck at a certain level of development, in terms of brand development. So I realized, okay, this is not going to work.
Was there, just a quick one, Oscar, was there a factor of, although you were very passionate about this area, but maybe you weren't enough income was not coming? Was there a factor in that as well, in your decision to pivot to something else? Or because some people say, look, I'm really passionate about this, even if pays really low or it doesn't pay the bills. Your livelihood
we lost you there for a second for him, I think.
Yeah, for a second.
Yeah.
Can you repeat that question? So what I wasn't passionate enough to continue, you mean?
Yeah, or did the financials of it as well made you then pivot, because maybe it was not bringing in enough money to survive, and maybe
both. Of course, as a business owner, let's say if you have a team, you need to pay bills, and I also need to be realistic. I've done probably a lot of stupid things in my life, which I don't regret. But I never put myself, at least other people, not in danger.
Okay.
So if I mean, there's only so much empathy can get if hey, all right, we're doing really well, and then of course there's periods as a smaller business where you kind of think, okay, how do I need to pay the bills? So either I need to reduce the salaries, or we need to come up with a solution here if there's nothing else in the pipeline. So the business model we had at the time was quite volatile in terms of, because the team was not big enough to take on really big clients. So you were working with smaller clients. So of course the value is smaller. And that's always this sort of chicken and egg story. Okay, how many clients can you have? Because if one drops out, or like one or two don't pay on time, then you really rely on them. So that's always been very, very difficult. So I realized that this model of traditional retaining campaigns wasn't very sustainable, because people didn't want to sign a long-term retainer with small agencies, which puts you in a situation of, okay, then you do shorter projects. You of course charge a little bit higher, but so you need to find a balance, because you need to continuously have enough of those shorter, smaller projects. And the market, I've noticed here in Hong Kong at least, wasn't big enough for that particular brand strategy projects.
Yeah.
So, and that's why I kind of wrapped it up after, I think, 3 years. And I thought, okay, I tried. I just need to call it a day. And
how hard was that decision, and how long did you sort of track that decision out from, like, when you maybe realized, okay, it's not going the way I thought it would, to then actually pulling the plug and saying, like, okay, and also informing your team, and maybe also, be needing to tell friends and family, listen, I'm going to stop. I guess that is that was not an easy decision to make, and not an easy thing to accept.
Well, I don't think there's so much of a choice. I mean, if the numbers don't add up, then, then you're kind of forced into, right, I need to buy food, I need to pay rent, I've got somewhere to live. So yeah, it's almost an evolution into something that's unavoidable. Yes, it's difficult. Of course, it's not easy, but it's also, if you make that decision, it's also kind of a sigh of relief. So, okay, well, the chapter went on for a while, because closing a business is actually not easy. So yes, that took a while, but I wasn't sort of, I mean, I had other passion, so I started a new business. So I met, during the periods, I met someone else and I started another business. And the plan was to set up a website, a SaaS website platform. So we would provide templates and people could actually design their own websites. It wasn't completely new, but there weren't so many amazing templates available. Now with the new solutions, it actually looks pretty amazing. So we started this. Again, I underestimated at the time was actually not sales. What we underestimated at the time was actually to explain how the platform actually worked. So we really underestimated the customer service. So we're building this platform that kind of worked, but then we had to explain it. I mean, this was really rudimentary stuff. So we spent hours and hours with people to explain how it works, and also we were customizing way too much. I mean, the concept was, hey, you drag and drop stuff, but then of course people always want something that doesn't exist. I don't know how they find. No, but they want this specific font or that kind of Dropbox.
Florian and I are smiling because this has been, when you want to change the out-of-the-box features and configs.
I think this is resonating a lot with what we sort of spend our time with still. And I think especially the part where you say, like, we built the technology, and I think what we also see a lot, and I still see a lot when I work with my clients, is like, you build them a technology, and then for you, a lot of those things are like they're so familiar to you. You need to be aware that they are not for other people. As you just explained, for you maybe it was pretty self-explanatory how it works, but then when customers actually start using it, the whole customer service explaining them how it actually works is the difficult bit. And that's what we see a lot with, like, you build a technology, but then the ops model and enablement side around it to actually help people explain how to use it in their daily life is usually the much harder bit.
No, exactly. So again, it wasn't a complete surprise, but again, one of the things that we kind of underestimated. The good thing was that we were put in a situation again of survival. And I thought, okay, well, we need to come up with something different. Clearly, the people that we are working with technology, they felt that because they couldn't see the things that we were coding for them, so they had no clue what they were paying for, which I completely understood. So we actually started doing social media campaigns. So the great thing about social media campaigns, I noticed that first of all, it's very visual, and I mean, you can just pitch the funnel. You could say, hey, this happens, this step, boom, you sign up, and I hope, okay, you have extra sales. That's something very easy to understand, and especially Facebook at the time was big. And I found a kind of niche in the market at the time. So what I learned from my previous business was that people want to have retainers. But at the same time, if you work on the corporate side, now probably Fahim, you know this, you hate retainers, because you don't want to be locked in, and especially, and that's not to diss agencies, but of course, if you are being calculated by the hour. No.
Yeah, you need to know what you're paying for and what the output is. Yeah, that's
Exactly.
That's,
So there needs to be a high level of trust.
Mm.
So the money is there at the corporate level, but sometimes they feel, okay, I have no clue what I'm paying. I mean, I've signed an off. There's trust, and I'm not going to check every hour they spend on this. So I figured out that it was, in order to get those long contracts, was impossible for us as a smaller agency. But it was way easier for us to do the shorter projects, the 3-4 months. And also noticed that it was actually way better to do the shorter projects because people are way more excited. And typically you would have the same team. If you work on a 12-month project, you have to rebuild probably relationships 2-3 times during the project because people change all the time.
True.
Project manager, the account director, a new marketing director, and you need to rebuild a relationship again. And they keep asking you the same questions, and then you kind of start redoing stuff. And it actually it really interrupts with if you have a bigger campaign.
True.
So the smaller campaigns were actually way more fun because people were for 3-4 months. People can see the light at the end of the tunnel, basically, when you start. And after let's say when a campaign ends, it ends. And of course, there is a risk for us in terms of, okay, if we do a good job, we'll do another one. If not, then not. But the good thing was that this was a high turnover because the budgets were lower. So we weren't relying on boardroom approval. So if you talk about 12 or 24 month retainers, you talk about big sums of money. And that needs to be approved. When you talk about smaller budgets, let's say the manager can just approve that. So that actually really worked, because the campaign, the concept or the methodology behind the campaign, it's quite similar in terms of how you run this. Of course, the creative part is something you cannot duplicate. Yeah. But of course, you make spin-offs. And so that worked really well for us.
How long did you do that? So you pivoted from a website maker, from a blue template-driven website maker to running campaigns for clients and brands. How long did you do that for?
A few years. Yeah.
A few years. Okay.
But again, we ran into the problem of, okay, so we can do this. In creative work you can't duplicate this. So again, it was
it's not scalable. Yeah.
It's not scalable. Yeah. So we looked at the team, and the challenge we faced was, okay, if you really want to scale this, so how do you scale some creative work? So we have this process in place. We know, okay, you start with the attribute. It's just 4 or 5 steps in there, key steps. You can replicate that. There's a model. But the creative work, of course, you can't copy and paste that. Clients know this. And that was actually the hard work. So for us, we weren't able to really come up with an idea, okay, how can we scale creative work?
And what's the idea that you need to scale to a certain level over time in order to make the business model viable, and then you didn't reach that level of scale, and that's why you then decided that it's not going to work? Or you just, like, at one point you said, like, well, it's too tedious to do it all over again, and everything is manual?
So of course there's always a danger of repetition. And I think one of the great things about working in creative agency is diversity. If you work in-house, I don't know your experience, Fahim. Of course, if you work in-house, there's a slightly slower pace, which is not necessarily a bad thing. But you work for one client. If you work for an agency, you work with multiple clients, and it's very exciting because if this idea doesn't work here, you maybe can pitch it to someone else, or you have 5,000 ideas and you work with a lot of different clients. So there's pros and cons. I think the obstacle we were facing in terms of, if you run multiple clients, again, it's about size of the client and how the size of your team. So if you either need to get a big loan from, let's say, the bank, or you need to have enough capital to take that step of, if you go to another bigger client and this client does not pay. Now, if you, let's say you have 10 big clients, one big client doesn't pay, that could be a massive dent in your budget
for your cash flow.
For your cash flow.
Yeah.
So that's always a bit of the real dilemma. So again, we faced a similar problem.
Yeah. Okay. So I think we're definitely going in a theme here, which is good. We'll see where the desk will end up, and maybe. But before we get there, Oscar, I've always had this debate with, and I appreciate the creativity sort of folk and the industry behind it. You know, that's where really the magic happens, and these are the moments that you remember. I'm just thinking whether, you know, you being from a creative background, you know, you mentioned how, you know what, you want to be unique and you don't want to reuse the same idea. If the idea works, if the creative idea works, even to replicate it for another client or whatever, is it such a bad sin for a creative to reuse the creative idea? If it outputs the same business value, I sometimes feel that whenever a creative agency is given a brief, they feel they have to reinvent something that's never been done before, you know, and sometimes you're spinning wheels because, you know, they're aiming for the uniqueness rather than maybe the business impact. I don't know. I've always been debating that. And you mentioned that, I know it's not scalable and you felt wrong reusing the same ideas. Maybe some of them were applicable or not. What are your thoughts on that side of?
Well, I mean, by definition, I don't think you can completely duplicate unless you really copy and paste stuff. But yes, you follow the same.
I mean, I'm talking about the
structure,
the anchor, the structure, or the seed of the idea, at least.
Yeah, but I would say by definition you always adapt a little bit because you try to create a narrative. So it's unheard of that the narrative is exactly the same.
Agreed.
So, but I agree with you. Yes, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. I mean, an e-commerce funnel is an e-commerce funnel. I don't have to reinvent this. You know? You put something in the basket and you check out and boom. So yes, maybe you can optimize this, but I agree you don't have to reinvent that. But there is, of course, there are moments, I think, when you are in the creative industry, and this is probably, it depends for everyone. And that's probably one of the reasons why I've never been able to do anything for myself, is because you become very self-critical. If you work for a client, it's okay, there's a deadline, it is what it is. No? And there are moments you think, it wasn't award-winning stuff, but no.
Paid the bills.
It pays the bills. It's Friday night. I'm done. Monday is a new day. So you need to be practical. And it's not always, I don't think for every, of course, ultimately, I don't think it really, to me, it never came down to money. So if the client is nice, then you make the extra effort. I don't think,
the value relationships,
I don't think it has to do anything with creative work. And I've noticed that in business in general. If you build empathy, if you try to be understanding, if you really have a good relationship with someone, you go the extra mile. And
100%.
True.
And that's not just in creative work. But I've noticed, especially in creative work, and we'll jump to the desk in terms of creative work as well, that has been the pitch for us, because we cannot, as a client now, so I own my own business here, if I look at other competitors out there, their budget is way bigger than our budget. So the only way I can compete and go to an agency and say, we don't have a big budget, but what I can give you is complete creative freedom. So all that stuff that the client said, this is way too ridiculous, I want to see those ideas.
You did a whole reverse psychology on them, huh?
Yes, because I know that the creative directors are frustrated because they don't get some of the ideas through. And that, I think, is. So you kind of no. So I
like
prefer
that.
engineer it.
I mean, I think that's a really good point. I think there's definitely sort of like a niche, and there have been a couple of players emerging over the last couple of years where, you know, they really bring back the sort of like everything goes creativity back into the industry. Because I think with what has happened, sort of, you know, the if you are being maybe consolidated into like a bigger network and so on, there's obviously also financial decisions that that come along with deciding what you're going to pitch to a client, right? And there's the thing, am I going to pitch the thing that I think is safe, or I think that is very like innovative and like almost like unheard of, right? And then which one are you going to bring to the client? Well, probably the safe thing, because of you know, you might not want to upset people. And then having actually a niche where you say like, no, we're gonna be the people who really gonna, you know, show the art of the possible, and maybe, as you said, maybe the art of the ridiculous once in a while, because it's just different, can be a very different, interesting approach.
But I've noticed that this is also quite difficult, because if you work too long in the agency, you kind of I don't know, so sort of trained by doing commercial things that
Yeah.
if I would say, hey, there you go, do whatever you want. No, just I just want to see crazy shit. No,
Yeah.
and people they really struggle with this because they come up with the same things that I say, well, this is probably what you've pitched to someone else as well, because I don't think it's crazy enough.
Yeah.
So you kind of get into this zone where it's really hard to break out once you've been in that for quite a few years. I mean, what is crazy, by the way? I don't know, but maybe my levels of craziness is just
it's crazy to think that working in a creative environment could actually make you less creative over time, right? But it's sometimes it can happen if you sort of like limited by the ideas that you feel comfortable putting forward just because of the environment you work in. That's sort of like, it's counterintuitive of what a creative environment actually should be. But yeah,
well, I mean, and of course, I think people have the maybe a misunderstanding of what creativity is, because it's not only, I mean, a good campaign is not just original or unique, but it really, of course, represents a brand
and delivers results.
Results in a way of, sometimes hard to say, okay, how much dollars it makes, but you see when a campaign is well designed, it has a flow in it. It resonates with the user, so it's not completely random. It's not, hey, we have a crazy idea and just let's go for it. But so of course there's a lot of work still to do after that, and I think that's probably, at least from my personal perspective, I don't think it's difficult to come up with crazy ideas. I think the real challenge is to kind of align that with the customer expectations. And because of course you always take massive risk if you say, okay, we're gonna do something that no one else has done, and you just also can't prove or articulate why it would work, because you can't. It's something new. So that's where then you need to have a client say, okay, well, fuck this, we're just gonna do it. I think it's really cool, and if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But of course, these are complicated, complex conversations that you have.
Definitely. So maybe to make the segue into the you know, your most current thing that you're doing and you're working on, and something that we've been now mentioning for a couple of times, and we can still see behind you. So you then decided to sort of leave that world behind, at least from a running an agency and running a creative business. Well, you're still involved to some extent in the General Assembly as like an instructor. So you probably still get your doses of creativity per week, and, you know, being creative. But what then triggered really the step into starting this co-working space company in Hong Kong? And maybe also, like, you know, how has the journey been so far?
Again, it was really random. I was looking to start a new business. I met quite a few people, and I was looking for space. So I met Thomas. So Thomas is my business partner and co-founder. So the three co-founders, Adrian, Thomas, and myself.
Mm-hmm.
But I met Thomas because I was looking for space. And so I just was having a chat. And then he was talking about co-working space. And I
What year
noticed...
was this? What year was this?
4 years ago.
Okay.
2016. So I noticed that they were fairly... So that they could really use help on the marketing side and branding side. So I said, okay, well, we'll make a deal here. I'm going to give you some advice, and then I can use your space. So we started with that. And then after 3-4 weeks, I said, well, there's really no point for me to give you all this advice if you're not going to do anything with it, if you can't actually execute it.
True.
No, I mean, it's kind of... Yeah, and it's not because he didn't want to. He's an economist, so he's got a completely different background. So I noticed that someone needs to do something with it. So I put my other business on hold and actually said, okay, I'm just going to run this for 3 months, and then we'll take it from there. And that's how actually I got involved in co-working. So it wasn't really my plan to go into co-working.
Okay.
But so 4 years later, I'm still here. And one of the reasons why I'm still really involved in the business, because I really believe in the concept of collaboration. You know? And especially now, what's going on, going back to that first question that you had that had 16 other questions in there, but you said something about COVID-19. Especially now with COVID-19, I think people realize that one, okay, working from home has its benefits, but you can actually collaborate with technology. You know? There are, and also to find solutions. If you look at the global economy or global politics, you see, in order to fight COVID-19, you need to work together. So collaboration becomes more and more relevant, you know, whether it's in design with the technology that we have, with work in general. So I think one thing that I've seen is that I think everyone believes in the concept of collaboration, and especially at co-working spaces, but no one seems to know how to do this, because the assumption is that this just happens, you know? That, hey, we have a beer tap or ping pong table, we put some people in close proximity, and boom, we have community.
And magic's gonna happen.
Yeah. And it's a bit like creative work. Okay, I'm just gonna sit and have 5 beers, and boom, I have an amazing idea. It may happen. The likelihood that this probably won't. And the same with collaboration. It needs to be actually cultivated. It needs to be designed. And that actually has got me really busy. I mean, that's my passion in terms of how can we design environments and practices where people really collaborate. It's not where they, hey, you're an accountant, I'm an architect, and let's exchange services. That to me is just matchmaking and networking. But if you talk about real collaboration in terms of creative work or anything, so I have knowledge, I want to share with you, and then you come up with another idea based on what I that to me is collaboration.
Yeah. So I just want to quickly jump in here, and I'm smiling because I'm wondering if Fahim thinks that I set him up for this, because I think a lot of what you just said must resonate massively with him. And you know, I don't need to speak on your behalf, but what you've been creating in as part of this co-location initiative in Unilever, I think resonates probably a lot with what
I do feel you've set me up for this. Like, I was like, wow, okay.
I didn't. I swear.
So no, you're right. I know it's all unscripted. So Oscar, no, I also have a massive passion on really understanding the human behavior, the psychology of, you know, what makes people bring the best version of themselves, you know, and how can you create an environment where, you know, that they can be themselves, that pure flow of ideas with no judgment, a safe environment, you know, whatever you, however we want to describe it, is something I've been tinkering with and experimenting with where I am at the moment. And largely it was based on physically co-locating small teams and giving them a problem to work through. And ultimately, you matched people up in a certain way, not from their skill set perspective, but also their personality types. So I went deep on the psychology of personality types, and the analysts, campaigners, whatever the different types are. And when you look at the data that comes out and the impact that they're having, you start to realize, why teams start to work well together and why not all. And it could be just maybe the sample that you've chosen, etc. But it's a fascinating area for me as well. But now that the physical co-location isn't happening, in the past few episodes, Florian and I, along with guests, we've been really wrestling with, look, how do you create that chemistry and magic in a virtual world? Because I truly believe that there needs to be an element of trust and empathy that the team needs to build before the work starts, so that there's the element of that and how you
Sometimes
cultivate that in a virtual.
Which the physical world usually helps, right? If you've met once before or for a longer period of time and you've worked together in a physical space, then the transition, our hypothesis at the moment, then the transition into the virtual world is much easier. If everything starts in the virtual world, sometimes it feels a little bit more difficult to do that. So, but I mean, you
I don't know, what are your views on that?
Yeah.
Because we think it's difficult, maybe coming from a particular angle of what's worked for us before. Do you feel now in the co-working space, especially in your current business, that the COVID and the social distancing gives you an advantage that you can jump on? Or how do you even view this particular dilemma?
Well, I think so. The initial assumption, I think this is quite a general assumption that people have, is that it is really hard to build trust online, virtually. Like people do go on Zoom, and yeah, there's maybe something to say for that. So we've been running quite a few tests in the last few weeks. We've been running virtual sessions, and I'll give you a little bit of background, a few seconds, but because we actually started with physical sessions, workshops, where we were testing I don't know how familiar you are with sense making. So it's basically a workshop with complete strangers. You have a theme, and it's a sort of structured, without an agenda, a brainstorm session. So what you try to do is you try to map out different realities that people have in a workshop, in a physical environment that we did. And of course, then the COVID-19 happened. And we couldn't find any participants to test this. So we were in a way forced to do this online. So we've been running sessions online now, and we've noticed that this is actually completely the same. But maybe this is because the people that join Zoom are maybe a little bit more tech savvy. I don't know, more open-minded to it. But we had quite a few people that said, well, I didn't really want to join, but once I joined those sessions, I had a really fun time. And we're building some kind of, what is it? A community online. So for me, the question is, okay, yeah, what really is trust? I mean, can I build trust purely virtual? And can I build trust in a physical environment? I don't think one is better than the other, but I think the biggest challenge, or let's say mistake that people make, is that they compare the two. And I don't think one is better than the other. It's just really different. So we have to, like, for example, today, I don't feel that you're very different about you two than if we would have met in a physical environment. I think the flow of the conversation is very natural. But again, if you do something in a virtual space, you need to design it as well. And it's the same in a normal meeting. If you do a workshop session, or let's say a brainstorm session, and it's not designed, it's not some kind of, you don't necessarily have an agenda, but there needs to be some kind of format to it,
Yeah.
then it's not going to work. No, you can't just throw people together, and whether that's virtually or in a physical space. No? But once you design it, and if you do something virtually, you can use different tools, but you can create really deep engagement. So the sessions that we run for 2 hours are with complete strangers about complex subjects, and people are really deeply engaged. And the 2 hours they're gone, and people always say, "Wow, I mean, this is amazing."
And just to understand, these sense making sessions, are these part of the desk, and you would usually run them for people who hire a desk in your business, or how are those two things interconnected, or is it something else you do on the side?
So we work with a professor, Dr. Richard Claydon. So he's a behavioral scientist. So what we are trying to test is the concept of the 4 steps of, let's say, well, you are probably familiar with ideation, but there's one step before that is what we call sense making. So you don't know, so everyone has a slightly different perspective on a problem. You know? So let's say you have a theme, you have 25 people, and everyone will kind of sort of, you try to map out, okay, what are the actual questions that people have, or issues or ideas that people have about that. And basically what we're trying to do in 4 steps is basically going from, I say, idea to action. So and that's a workshop that we are designing now, but it's completely designed around collaboration. The reason why we believe in collaboration, well, first of all, is a co-working environment, because I think that's the future of work, is that we cannot fix things by ourselves anymore. It's just, the world is way too complicated. No, I mean, whether you talk about technology or politics or anything, it's just highly complex. So the only way of coming up with great solutions is to listen to other people and their perspectives and their insights and their knowledge. And I think you'll be surprised by, well, I never realized that, if you hear someone else's perspective. And so what it does is that, first of all, you learn a lot quicker because you hear other perspectives. And secondly, you actually build a bond as well, because these are typically fairly personal opinions that people have.
So that one for me is a very interesting one, because Fahim and I, we had, I think in one of our private conversations, a bit of a conversation around co-working, the industry. You know, WeWork has obviously been going through a lot of trouble over the last couple of months. You know, the IPO was called off and all that sort of stuff. So, and we were just like talking a bit like what the actual future of co-working could look like, because I think we both fully agree in the concept of it. But I think what we discussed, and what definitely my opinion is on the just renting out a desk in like a fancy office building, as you said, right, with a pool table and a beer tab, that's not for me a really viable business model, right? It's really more about selling the idea of, well, you're going to be in a room with people who you can collaborate with, who you can, you know, bounce back ideas with. If you work, maybe, you know, you're sole entrepreneur, and as a sole entrepreneur, obviously you need to do all tasks, right? You need to be a designer, an accountant, a strategist, potentially a web programmer, etc. But if you're then in an environment with people who, you know, you can just like quickly tap on shoulder and ask a quick question, I think that's the real benefit in terms of like the startup scene. So interesting to is that what you're trying to achieve by building this collaboration aspect into the co-location, co-working space?
Yeah, so the way I look at this is that there are 3 levels. So the first level that we are in right now is what I call is practical. So when people come to a co-working space, a physical environment, it needs to be physical safe. So the environment, you know, it's just practical stuff in terms of interior, from light to air conditioning to safety in general in the pantry. You know, and the price the price needs to be good. So that I would say this is a practical level.
Yeah.
The second level up from that is transactional. So transactional, the way I describe it is where people start networking. So you are a creative director or a copywriter or a strategist, and you look for a technologist or a programmer, and you meet each other, and that's I call is transactional, because I pay you to do a service or vice versa. No, there's no collaboration involved yet.
Yeah.
The top tier to me, and so what is happening right now in the industry, the phase or stage where I see our business or the industry as a whole, is that we are in between the practical and the transactional. And you don't see a lot of collaboration happening yet. The reason for that is that...
Which is the third level then? In
the third level, yeah.
Okay.
So the reason for that is that I think in general, most people in co-working are inexperienced with collaboration, because it does not happen by itself. So this needs to be designed. So matchmaking is easy to explain. Say, hey, John, this is Maria. Let's work together. You have some matchmaking, hosting events, and that's typically what most events are designed for at co-working spaces. Now you have a panel discussion. There's a bit of networking involved, exchanging of business cards. But it's fairly one-dimensional, I would say. But there is a practical reason for that as well. I also need to network. But when you talk about real co-working, to me, is at the top level of collaboration. This is where you really, as you said, I can go to you and share ideas. It's not about money. It's about sharing knowledge and actually finding a solution that I cannot do by myself. I need to find other people to help me with this. And I don't think we have achieved that level yet, because this needs to really be curated and moderated and facilitated. And that takes a lot of time. So that's what I'm working on right now in terms of this program, where we try to design this.
To what I'd be very curious, to what extent do you think is the human input a dependency on how much collaboration can happen on the other end? Because at the end of the day, right, let's say you have a space with 20 desks, yeah, don't you need to be sort of controlling what human input comes and sit at those desks, so you can actually even be able to foster some collaboration? Because if there's just 20 of the same people sitting in that space, what are they going to collaborate on, right? They're not really going to have the complementary skills that maybe the other person is seeking for. So do you have any sort of like triage process of who you give a desk to, or is that something maybe for the future to really drive collaboration, that you need to make sure that there's the right, mix and diversity of people in the room?
Or is it a separate? I think the way I'm understanding it, you're designing a separate proposition service that people can take advantage of. So you'll have the needs 1 and 2, nice environment, there's some networking events, etc. But if folks either externally or within that environment have an idea, but it's just an idea, and I've always said an idea alone is worth nothing, they may use this service that you've created to give it every best chance of success. Is that how we really get right?
I mean, of course, I'm realistic that, so the first thing about collaboration is that there needs to be intent. So if I'm not interested in collaboration, it's not going to work. And end of the collaboration. But if you and everyone that's listening tonight or during the day, if you have an intent to collaborate, that's where it starts off. You need to have that. So my assumption is not that everyone will do this. And some people would just want to work by themselves. I mean, they're too busy, they have other projects, and they don't have time to collaborate. So you're probably right, Fahim, to say, yes, this is a program that, compare it with a gym. So I can go to the gym whenever I want to get physically fit. And this is a gym to train your brain.
Mm.
And you need to train this as well. Collaboration, again, needs training, because you talk about cognitive skills that you need to develop. And I think this is not something that your manager in a normal job will give you. At university, maybe a little bit, but in fact, university just trains you to, not, it's quite individual. You need to learn certain things, underlying concepts and whatever you need to learn at university, but it's not really designed around collaboration.
Yeah. No,
And
I like the
work,
tip. No, go ahead.
And at work, this is something that no manager is teaching you either. Oh, how do you some people have this naturally, they will network and they are a connector, but collaboration is something that we've been talking about for so long in the industry. And you have all those, I think there's many consultants out there that will try to sell this to corporations. Hey, your team needs to collaborate. I think that the biggest challenge in that is that it's twofold. The company, and I'm sure that everyone had this experience in team building events. So you go away for like 1 or 2 days or even afternoon, you have a lot of fun. I don't know, you get drunk or not drunk, but you kind of bond with people, and you do this once a year. So the assumption is, hey, we just put people together once a year and boom, people start collaborating. Yeah. But again, if you want to get physically fit, you need to continue this. So as a corporation, if I want to invest in collaboration, this needs to be continuous. It's not like, hey, we send the executives on a team building event for once a year and then it's going to happen. That's going to be hard. And it's not because there's no willingness to do this, but you need to train your brain to collaborate as well. And that's basically the program that I'm looking at. So it's an ongoing sort of session that people can join or not join. But as they do it more, they will probably get more benefits from this.
And it resonates. I was just going to say that it resonates a lot, especially when you design, when you're doing team building events or workshops. There is a lot of pre-work involved in designing the outcome. You gotta work through what you want to achieve, and then design the outcome, and not influence it where, there's an answer you want to get to at the end, but you want to come out of this with an outcome that you can take back. So I think that resonates a lot, and I do feel, I'm sure there is some workshop facilitation things involved, but even with that, usually the service is there. They'll turn up in the morning, not knowing the context in as much detail. So I think, even designing the output, the pre-work that you mentioned, the sensing element of an ideation, I feel it's all not done in a methodological, in a process-driven manner, and you need to have some sort of structure to help you increase its success of the output. So resonates a lot. Yeah.
Well, yes and no. So this is a funny experiment we did. So sense making has no agenda. The only thing it has is actually theme. But there's not really moderator or facilitator even. And especially in Hong Kong, this is very confusing. So if so,
no agenda. You can't turn up with no agenda.
Yeah. So, and you say, okay, what's the outcome? So we don't know. That's something you have to figure out, because you're part of the participants. So this is really hard for people to understand. So when I go to a workshop that people expect an agenda and a certain outcome, and I said, there will be an outcome, but I don't know what that outcome is.
That's right.
There is an agenda, but that's not what I design. You will design it together. Yeah. That's the concept of sense making, which is very confusing for people.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
No, I just remember some. I've uncertainty avoidance is like one of the big things in the Asian culture, right? So it's like especially in the workspace. So facing uncertainty and environments of uncertainty is something people really like to avoid. And I've experienced that myself being out there, for example, in Hong Kong in workshops. So I can just like imagine you setting up a meeting where I said like, yeah, there's no agenda. We don't know what the outcome is going to be, but collaborate, and people like, what the heck?
Yeah, Oscar, you're a good friend, but I don't know. Well, no, but and it's not. Oh, this is actually not just Asian people, because we actually had a mix of different nationalities here in Hong Kong, and it depends on the industry that people work in as well. I think the reason why we've been able to do it is pure trust.
Yeah.
No, they know me. They kind of ask a few questions. They said, listen, I gave them some kind of description, but it was very hard to describe because I said one.
What I haven't yet fully understood it, is this something that people get access to by being part of the desk, or is this something you offer on top of they becoming part of the desk, but you don't really charge them for because you see this as a learning exercise for the business? And what's the business angle on this thing, or is it simply a research project?
Well, at the moment we're experimenting with this, but we are selling the service. I mean, so the two parts. One is where existing community members can sign up for a free trial period, and of course, then external people just sign up as a member. So it's a additional service.
So you could, like, let's say, I'm the manager of like a team, and I think it'd be really good for one of my team members to go through this exercise. They can then sign up and participate in that, for even if they're not part of the desk in terms of having a desk.
Yeah. So one other project that we are running is basically with a company, bigger company, and we're looking at real estate. So yes, it could be. So what we're trying to test are two things. So of course we can have a general theme if you have a really high level of diversity. So diversity is really good if for certain subjects and certain problems. But if you want to get closer to getting an action plan, you kind of need to have people in the industry, because otherwise because it
you stay at ideation.
Yeah, so you basically go for a funnel really wide, and you try to funnel that into something that's quite industry specific. So let's say the real estate here, let's say in Hong Kong, I'm sure that's worldwide, the retail is struggling. So what possible ideas will be out there? So you could start really wide, from consumers, old female, old men, whatever, a whole mix of different people. But then, of course, ideally you want to get to experts within the industry, that group will become bigger. So we can basically tackle specific problems per industry. But the whole concept around this is that this is done collaboratively with complete strangers, outsiders, and of course experts as well. But expert is I always find it a little bit of a difficult word, because sometimes listening to an actual consumer, he or she could be the expert. So that's why I think it's so good that when you collaborate, you should have a very open mind. Everyone has a certain perspective, and it's not right or wrong in this case. The fact that you are CEO of a business, and someone is a user, and is maybe a receptionist during the day, he or she can have very valuable insights of how to use the product or service that the CEO has no clue about. So this is actually really relevant, that people connect the dots.
So now that's really interesting, Oscar, actually, because you're right. Who is really the expert? And I think it changes on the context. Maybe just switching gears, and I think it's been fascinating just hearing your journey of how you went from you started with, well, let's say, passion is an overused word, but, you got into design and creativity with the accessory stuff. Then somehow you ended up in supply chain. And then you managed to climb yourself out of that and realized that, you wanted to get back into the creative space, realized your portfolio wasn't really up to scratch or wasn't up to date. So you reinvented yourself by creating your own thing and done about, 3 or 4 different jumps. I think one thing that I think, Florian and I would really benefit and the viewers as well is, it felt as if, and I made a note here, says, look, you were one ingredient that allowed you to reinvent yourself was this notion of survival, so your back was against the wall. There was no choice but to reinvent and pivot to something else. And then the other connection I made was around people. So randomness, people, and business. Somehow there's an ingredient to how you've been going through this cycle. What are you, does that have you reflected back on your journeys, or you're like, look, dude, it's all, don't try and connect dots when there ain't any dots, So have you ever had any reflections on this pattern personally for yourself?
And then it's a really good question, because I do get asked this quite a lot, fairly often. Oscar, what do you actually do? And I say, well, yeah, I sometimes don't even know that myself. But so, and the reason why I don't know this, because it's also relevant for me, is that what I've learned is that people want to put you in a box. You're either an accountant or a finance person, or you specialize in something. And I think there's nothing wrong with that. But I think if you live with all the opportunities that you have around you right now you can travel, you can work remote, people don't stay in a job for 20 years in the same industry. So the way I come over is that I hopped a lot to different areas. But I think what people don't realize that I actually connect those dots. So yes, I worked in supply chain product development, but in fact, I'm actually using that knowledge that I have, especially what I do right now is product development. And I've noticed that a lot of people don't know how to develop a new product from scratch. It's not easy. So I use design in this as well. I did a master's in design management, which I'm actually using as well. The experience I have with people in general, I think most people in the creative industry, one thing that you need to do in the creative industry, I think is really good, is that you need to place yourself in other people's, you need to have a different perspective, because you actually design for other people. So you need to have very strong imagination of how someone else would feel about or see and thinks about a certain thing. So all those elements I combine in my job. So there's a lot to cover.
Yeah.
But I think for me, this really works because I just love the diversity. And a lot of people struggle with this. They say, Oscar, I still don't know what you are doing. And I say, well, because I do a lot of different things.
No, I think that's really, really great. And you said something at the beginning, and I actually noted it down. It's like you never regretted doing and I put it in quotation, stupid things in life, right? Because maybe at this point where you did them, they might have looked stupid, but then in retrospective, as long as you then manage to connect the dots and build something out of it, that maybe if you would not have gone to Beijing and you would have taken that year out of your life, or you would not have started that web template builder business, maybe it would not have led you to where you are right now, right? And it's not so much about like judging the stupid decisions you've made in the past, but trying to connect them up in a good, sensible way, and work with it. So I think that's very.
And I would say, Oscar, is that intentional? So going with the flow and knowing how things have worked out for themselves to a certain extent, and this sense of adventure, do you intentionally put yourself towards those things where, hey, look, we're not sure where this will lead to, but there's a good gut feeling about this, and I'll just trust the world and how it connects the dots. Is that, do you do that intentionally, or is it, look, just go from gig to gig and bring your experience with you?
I think it's a little bit of both. So yes, there is an element of being very let's say spontaneous element in here, no? Where I think, you know what, let's just do it. I only live once. And then I have moments where I overthink things. But I think this is very natural. You need to do both things. And I don't think there is some kind of golden rule where I say, hey, if you do exactly those 3 steps, then this is how it's going to end. And like anyone else, I get super stressed and I have happy moments, but this is always a super fine balance. The one thing I've learned is that it's hard to predict what's going to happen, and no one can tell you, especially as a business owner, but even in personal life, it's really hard to say whether you've made the right decision or not. Because maybe in a week's time it was the stupidest thing ever, but then a year later when you talk to friends, it was the best story that you ever had.
Yeah.
So it's what is the context? I mean, most things that I've known, unless you're really stupid and you take you play with your health, or there are some things that are very dangerous, then of course that's a different story. But in general, if you just look at time, it pretty much fixes everything.
Yeah. The more you can zoom out, right, the less stupid things actually look like. But if you're in the micro, in the moment, then as you said, like for the day or for the week, for the month, or even for the year, it might, what stupid stuff I did. But then when you zoom out and you look at it maybe in like a 5-10 year perspective, then it doesn't look.
So it's like, I mean, so we got married about 3 years ago, and probably that was the most terrible wedding ever. But if I tell the stories, it's really fun. So it depends how you put things in perspective.
Cool.
The one thing I've learned from doing a lot of different things is that I really care about people, but at the same time, I don't really care about what people say and what they think. In a good way that I mean, yes, you build a thick skin. And I think it is, if you are, whether I like it or not, I know I have certain opinions. But I cannot change certain things. I can, of course, I can change certain habits. I can drink more or less, or I can drink certain food, or become vegan or not vegan. So I can break those habits. But I think I've always kind of been attracted to people that think different. And there is no way I can force myself to be in an environment where people always agree. It's
100%.
It's for me really difficult. And that's one thing I just cannot do. So I either just accept that and then believe, okay, Oscar, you may be the odd one out, but who cares? It is what it is. And I think some people put a lot of personal pressure. So you want to fit in to something. And then, I've never had that. I mean, everyone has those personal struggles where I think, okay, well, I wish I could be a little bit more normal, or I don't know what that actually is, but sort of, I wish I would have planned my pension a little bit better. The things like that. But that's, other than that, I don't think I have a lot of regrets.
Cool. So I think we're in a very good flow, but we've been going on for over an hour, and I tremendously enjoy this conversation, and I sort of feel maybe this is just like part one of what it should be, and maybe we're gonna bring you on again in the future, because I think there's so many things I've been writing down that I actually wanted to go into, but like
I was holding back myself.
I think we would go on for 3-4 hours.
This is going to be another half an hour.
I think we can definitely do a deep dive in collaboration.
For sure.
I think that'd be really
Yeah,
good.
I think we should definitely do that. I think that's also something we've been talking about a lot. So maybe we can then do the first one non-scripted. So actually a scripted one, we do some preparation, really go through stuff. But yeah, other than that, maybe you can, after we stop recording, you can stay on for a bit just so we can just wrap up things. But yeah, I think unless Fahim, do you have anything else?
No. Really enjoyed the conversation. Just hearing your journey, Oscar. I think it will be hopefully a source of inspiration, and ideas, and especially thinking different and exposing yourself to some uncertainty. I think it's been, a little bit of your journey. I think it's we can all get a healthy dose of that, and whenever we've done that, you always look back and say, that was a really good thing. I don't know why I was nervous about that. Definitely. So no, pleasure. No, thank you, Oscar, and yeah,
thanks a lot as well
next time.
For him. Yes, it was my pleasure.
Yeah, so also from my side, just like thank you, Oscar. Also, thank you, Nico. I think you
shout out twice now.
You helped to make that happen. So yeah, other than that, I'm quickly gonna read us out. So yeah, thanks everyone for listening. As always, like if you're on YouTube, make sure you subscribe, like, share the video with your friends. If you're on Spotify, please download the podcast. Leave us a review. Also tell your friends, colleagues, family, everyone about it. If you have any questions, if you want to be on the show, please email us at findingnorthpodcast@gmail.com. That's findingnorthpodcast@gmail.com. Yeah, that's it. Have a great week. All stay safe. See you next week. Cheers.
Yeah. Thank you.